I'm told I need to speak quite loudly. Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Fine, I shall keep close to the microphone. Welcome. Thank you for coming along to join our session on the Top 200 event on growth, which we ran on the 13th and 14th of June at Imperial College. I understand that about halfway through the session, Jeremy Hayward is going to stop. He's going to finish his session and join us. So I'm guessing some colleagues will join us then. What I'd like to do, we're going to change the format a little bit. I'm going to say just a little bit about why we chose to do a Top 200 themed on growth and what some of the really important headline messages were from that. And then what I'd like to do is hand over to some of my DG colleagues who kindly led themed breakout sessions on what we felt were some of the most important themes for us to think about. So entrepreneurship and markets, skills, exports, and decentralization. But they're going to talk to us in a moment. Let me just explain first the thinking behind this. I hope everybody knows what Top 200 actually is, but can you put your hands up if you do? Because I may be just taking things for granted here. Not everybody. Okay, well, let me just explain very briefly. Top 200 is an event that typically happens twice a year. It is a modestly titled gathering of all the permanent secretaries and DGs from across government, and it's really an opportunity for us to get together and think about what some of the key policy, operational and management and leadership challenges are for us as a group of civil servants trying to lead the civil service successfully through this government and beyond. We decided that it was right to think in this event about growth because it seems pretty self-evident that growth is going to be the overriding priority, not just of this government, but frankly of the next government to come as well. So it felt that it was important to us that we both ask ourselves, are we doing the right things? Are there some things which, for whatever reasons, may not be possible now, but we should be thinking about preparing ourselves for, maybe in a future government? So it's very much about trying to lift our sights and think collectively about, as I say, whether we're really focusing our efforts in the way that we need to, whether we're being ambitious and radical enough on this growth agenda. Martin Donnelly, the Perm Sec at BIS, and John Kingman, second Permanent Secretary at the Treasury, co-led the event, which I and my colleague Philippa Lloyd from BIS sort of then had a hand in pulling together with much help from colleagues. I'll just say a little bit about the overall event. I mean, we had a combination of fantastic... Can you hear me? Oh, I'm Bernadette Kelly, sorry, very good cue. I am Bernadette Kelly. I am Director General for Markets and Local Growth at the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills. And as I say, with my colleague, Philippa Lloyd, also from BIS, we helped to design and organise this event with help from our teams and help from colleagues across Whitehall. The event itself comprised a mixture of some great external speakers. So we had people like Jim O'Neill, who is just retired as head of Goldman Sachs, is credited with creating the term BRICS to describe the emerging economies, so a real expert on global economic change. We had Herman Hauser, great technology entrepreneur, who's the driving force behind much of what we're doing on technology in the UK. Peter Davis, a key asset fund manager and somebody who really thinks about what the big drivers of our economy are. So we had some great external speakers. Stephanie Flanders, I hope some of you will be familiar with as BBC economics editor. We also had a panel of our great non-executive directors from within government. Andrew Whitty, Chief Executive of GlaxoSmithKline, Sarah Weller, Chief Operations Officer of Argus, and Sam Laidlaw, head of Centrica, really commenting on their perception from being non-executives of how we in government are responding to the challenges of growth. And we had a fantastic range of visits. We went to Battersea Power Station, Heathrow Airport. We went to Tech City, of course, in Shoreditch. We visited Barclays, Sainsbury's, whole range of Anya Heinmarsh, maker of lovely handbags. We visited a range of businesses and key infrastructure projects critical to the economy. What did we learn? Firstly, what was very encouraging for me was that we heard consistently from our speakers and from our business and university colleagues that they were genuinely optimistic about the prospects for the UK on growth. We have great underlying strengths in our economy. We have great universities, we have a great science base, we have a very stable and attractive business environment for inward investment. You know, we have a huge amount to build on in our economy. So a real sense of optimism that we're not just now in the depths of recession, we're starting to see the prospect of growth, and we're seeing that too in the economic indicators, I think. We were reminded, of course, that some of our greatest strengths for an economy are not just in manufacturing, important though that is, but in our services sector and in what we do on education. There was a recognition that we've got some big challenges nevertheless. Our skills base is still too low, our infrastructure is creaking, we have some real problems about investing in top quality high-tech companies. And there were some very interesting questions about the regional divide in the UK. Are we in fact two economies, London and the South East and the rest? Or are we, as Andrew Whitty argued, really a small country that doesn't need to worry about that? We have a dynamic economy. But overall, I think one of the messages that I personally found quite encouraging and inspiring, and I hope my colleagues did too, was there was a lot of confidence in the capability of us, civil servants, to do the right things and to really focus our efforts on important things. What we heard from our business and other interlocutors was not get out of our way, which sometimes is what we hear about the government's role in growth, but absolutely an exhortation to us to continue concentrating on doing really important things, and a great respect actually for the capability that we demonstrate in our work on growth. Now with that, I'm going to ask Charles initially. Charles Roxburgh is from the Treasury. He will introduce himself, I'm sure, better than I introduce myself. I'll leave him to do that. He led some work, a themed breakout session on entrepreneurship and markets. And he's just going to say a few words about the big conclusions that came out of his session.
Great, thank you, Bernadette. As Bernadette said, I'm Charles Roxburgh. I'm a Director General at the Treasury. And I was part of the group that was discussing what we could do to really drive a much greater level of entrepreneurship in the UK economy. And our group, we had some outside experts, particularly Professor Mariana Mazzucato, who has published a very influential book called The Entrepreneurial State. And that was quite influential on our group's thinking. We debated a wide range of ideas about how to get more entrepreneurship, ranging from ideas like creating an online business school that would be a bit like an open university business school for the internet age, so that people could download videos and online tools to learn about marketing, finance, setting up a business. So that sort of idea. But where we concentrated on was a single idea that a number of people thought would actually bring real focus to our efforts as a government to stimulate more entrepreneurship. And that was to double our current spending on science and innovation. I think we currently spend around 4.6 billion, and this group concluded that we ought to set a goal to double that by the year 2020, and to focus that investment around a smaller number of themes where the UK had a clear leading edge in technology, where we had strong universities, where we could see a path to get a real payback on that investment, and whereby signalling a real commitment by the UK government to invest in whether it's biosciences or vaccines or advanced engineering or microchips around the Cambridge cluster. If we signalled real commitment of government investment in these themes, that would help attract a lot more private investment. So crowding in private investment around a set of national priorities on the science and innovation budget. Now, you don't normally get Treasury officials standing up and saying we should double spending on something like this, but the Treasury is highly supportive of this. We do have to find the issue of how we fund it. That gets more controversial as to where we take 4.6 billion away from to invest in this. But this group thought that actually this level of commitment behind a really big push on science and innovation spending would pay back handsomely. And we looked at international examples, particularly in America, where America spends a huge amount on basic research in health through the National Institute of Health, and a huge amount on basic research in advanced electronics and advanced materials, all part of the defense budget. But in effect, that is funding basic science and basic research that has underpinned much of the internet revolution. I think one of our outside experts held up her iPhone and said that most of the pioneering technologies on your iPhone actually stem from government funding. Whether it's the screen, which is based on funding for defense, the technology for the advanced materials that came out of US funding, or the Google search engine that was funded by US government funding, founded the original maths that underpins Google. So we concluded that there's a lot more the government could do to generate entrepreneurship by focusing our spending on science and innovation, doubling it over the next 5 years, and then attracting a lot more private sector investment behind those clear national goals. So that was our breakout. Happy to take any questions, or do you want to roll through all of them and then we... Yes, yep, great, yep. As I say, that was the controversial bit. We just decided that we would spend it. I think our breakout had ideas, each of which would have pluses and minuses. I think what we felt was, though, if the value of growth for the economy is such that this would actually be fundable by redirecting a lot of current spending that happens. The government spends a huge amount on subsidizing different classes of business or subsidizing different activities at the moment, and if we really concentrated that, we could create more funding to concentrate around these smaller areas of focus. But we didn't get into whether we'd take this from budget X or budget Y, because that would be that's really ultimately a political decision of which segment or which sector of the economy should pay for this. But we were extremely keen to try to get a greater focus behind science and innovation spending as part of the overall budget. Okay, great, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Antonia Romeo. I'm Director General Criminal Justice at MOJ. So I led the session with Indra Morris on exports, and we started from the basis that something's gone wrong with our exports policy because we've got an ambition as a government that we should increase exports to 1 trillion by 2020, and yet exports made zero contribution to growth last year, in fact a negative contribution. So something's gone wrong with our plan, and we really need to put rocket boosters under this in order to create a change. So we had a range of external speakers as well, from some of the more traditional industries like advanced manufacturing, as well as some of the newer creative industries. We had some CEOs from small SMEs in the creative industries come and tell us what they thought we were doing, and particularly what we were doing wrong and what government should do differently. Where we got to was we ended up with mainly 2 key strategies we thought that the UK should adopt. One is something that one of the advanced manufacturing firms said to us was, if we're competing as a British company with America, if we're competing with, say, General Electric, we're not competing just with GE, we're competing with the US government. What they do very effectively is they join up. So they find a sector or a country, say Singapore, and they will go in, they will bring together all the relevant companies, and they will make sure they've got a really joined up strategy. And that's something we just don't do well enough currently in the UK. So we spent some time discussing how we might better bring together both to target countries but also to target specific sectors. And as part of this, we thought about how we should pick some particular really good upcoming sectors, more in the sort of security, health space, things where the UK has a comparative advantage, where we really have an edge, and we could go in and target those sectors. The second thing we thought, and this was really the more challenging bit, was we had, as I say, a number of SMEs there who said to us, what you're doing at the moment is not really, maybe you give a bit of funding here or a bit of funding there. You're not across the board allowing us to up our intelligence level so we really understand what our market is. And what we want from you is for you to help us increase our knowledge base and put us in direct contact with our market. So we looked at how you could, by releasing certain forms of data, by finding big government databases, being careful about data protection and so on, but using data, bring together buyers and sellers in markets and actually help those SMEs have the level of intelligence that they need to contact their buyers themselves. And this would be a way that you would essentially, it's exactly what government should be doing, facilitating, not trying to do a big control top-down thing. So those are the 2 key points we came to. Happy to have any questions now, or we can pick up at the end in the... All right, good. Helen.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Helen Edwards and I'm Director General at DCLG, with responsibility for localism. So not surprisingly, I was asked to lead the session with Will Cavendish from the Cabinet Office on decentralisation and devolution. We heard some pretty interesting presentations from the panel, and one of the things that I was struck by was for example, the Cambridge cluster that Charles referred to, and we heard very interesting things about what were happening in Manchester. And it made me realise that although there is a lot of growth in London, we're very focused on London, probably rightly so, in the southeast, actually really interesting things are happening around the country. But a clear message we got, because for the session that Will and I led, we got some video clips. Rather than bringing people to us, we went out and videoed them around the country. So we got a chief executive of a local authority from the northeast, one from London, we got a chair of a local enterprise partnership, we got someone from the LGA and an academic, and their unequivocal message to us all was that we are too centralised in this country. We are in fact one of the most centralised countries, not just in Europe, but around the world. And there's a certain frustration out in the regions, out in local areas, that we don't quite trust people enough to give them what they need, really to get on and make the local city region a focus for real economic growth. So one of the things that we took away from this is if we're really, really serious about promoting economic growth, there are certain things we can do from Whitehall, and Antonia and Charles were talking about those, but actually we've got to be prepared to let go of some of the things we currently control. Funding around skills, funding around some of the local government money we put out, some of the funding we put out in terms of growth. Now we're putting a toe in the water at the Chancellor's part of the SR announcements announced 2 billion to go into what's called the Heseltine pot, Lord Heseltine's review of local growth, and that's to go into a sort of pooled pot, not at the local authority level, but to the LEP regions, local enterprise partnerships. And the idea is that they can begin to invest this money on the things that are right for them in their region. But they will need us to support that from Whitehall in terms of some of the things that are not very devolved. So the message is different parts of the country, and we heard it from Tees Valley too, have a different basis for promoting economic growth, but we have got to enable them to pursue it more than we do currently. So that was a big message that I took away. Rachel, sorry.
This microphone started very tall and it's going gradually down. Hello, I'm Rachel Samby-Thomas. I'm from the Department for Business Innovation and Skills, and I'm the Director General in charge of Business and Skills. The people who came to our workshop had the either advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, of actually having some slides set out to give them some kind of facts and kind of bars and graphs and things to kind of set them up so they kind of had already entered the world of skills before the workshop. I think one of the interesting things, which if you had read them you would have found out, which we wanted them to find interesting, is that actually although the UK scores very well in international comparisons at the higher education end, it doesn't score well round about the kind of the GCSE level end. The other place that doesn't score well in either is on how much money employers and businesses invest into skills. So people look, when people are talking about the Heseltine pots and where would you find budgets, people often look very enviously at my skills budget because it is, relatively speaking, quite a big budget. It's about £4 billion. But actually, if you compare that with the amount of money that employers already spend, and as we know internationally they're not even spending that much, it is something like 42 billion. So it really is a kind of a tiny government element and a fairly huge employer's element. So in our workshop, we had a chap called Nigel Whitehead come along, and Nigel Whitehead is very high up at BAE Systems, and he is also a commissioner for the UK Commission of Employment and Skills, which is one of our partner bodies. And what the aim of that body is doing, it's trying to get greater employer ownership of the skills agenda. So he set out in our workshop some of the work that they're trying to do in that. Partly, some of it is using this thing called the Employer Ownership Fund, which again, in the whole context of the skills budget, is a fairly tiny amount. But what they're trying to do is leverage in private sector finance, but it's not even so much the money that they're trying to get innovative ideas, people actually thinking about skills in this context. The other thing he's trying to do is actually simplify the qualification system, and again, trying to get the qualification system to be in the hands of the employers. So instead of the colleges, which is traditionally what's happened in the past, the colleges actually saying, this is what we think learners want, it's actually flipping it around so that the employers are saying, actually, this is what we want. And he gave some horrific stat that there was something like 12,000 different qualifications. He adopted a great phrase, and he said, this system is the self-licking lollipop, which I thought was a great phrase. Anyway, so he kind of said, right, this is the direction to travel. Do you agree? And how can we accelerate it? And that was what the conversation was about. So the headline message was, yes, absolutely, we agree. We need to move away from just looking at the skills system through the further education and the provider eyes into the employer eyes. Secondly, this has to involve small employers as well as big employers. And of course that in many ways is much, much harder to do because we actually have a lot of very good practice within the big employers. It's at 99.5% of our business economy, which is harder to reach. So the conclusion was that we need to basically help big employers kind of bring the smaller employers under their wing, and we need to build into the system incentives for people to collaborate and to train, and that we need to increase the pace of that. And the final conclusion was, and it kind of harks back to what Helen was saying, that actually this operates at loads of regions. So it operates at the individual learner, it operates at the business, but it also has the kind of the local and national one as well, because yes, you do need people knowing their local economy, knowing what skills they need, but actually the government still has a position knowing from a national point of view some of the kind of skills, for example, engineering, that we need as well. That's a very quick run through our workshop.
Thank you. And just for completeness, there were two other key themes that we talked about at the session. There we go. One was infrastructure, where the big takeaway really was that we desperately need in the UK to have a clear, stable, long-term plan for infrastructure investment. I visited Heathrow in the morning, where all of the conversation was about the continuing uncertainty of where we are going to expand our airport capacity in the southeast, and obviously the impact that is having on investment in the UK. And we talked about technology and innovation, where I think the key theme to emerge was the importance of us in government thinking through the lens of the life cycle of a high technology business, rather than as we tend to do in our own funding streams, really thinking about what sort of support these innovative companies need at different points in their development, whether they're startups, whether they're starting to get traction with their first big products, or whether they're actually growing into medium-sized and export companies. So those were the six themes that we talked about. I guess what would be helpful, I think we're quite a small number to break into small groups, but it would just be useful to know whether any of those, whether those findings, thoughts, reflections resonate with people here. Any questions that occur to you, listening to me and colleagues about what we were talking about? Do these feel like the right issues, and do they resonate with you and your departments? Yeah. So, do we have a roving microphone? Do you want to pop up and ask your question? Sorry. It's just otherwise nobody else can hear it.
Well, I just wanted to say that these themes have been around for a long time, and we need infrastructure. We've known that for years. We need devolution. We've known that for 10 years. The schemes have been around for so long. So are these ideas being sold as new, and what's going to happen now to implement them? And can we even do that with all the budget squeezes?
Yeah. Well, I'll try, but colleagues, come and answer with your reflections on your themes. No, I don't think they are particularly new. I think you're absolutely right. None of these things are issues that we haven't thought about, talked about, and worked hard to try and find policy solutions to for many years in government. But I think they are also, that doesn't mean they're not the right questions for us to continue to ask ourselves. So, infrastructure we know is enormously important to growth in the economy. Do we think we have sorted out infrastructure in everything we're doing in the UK? No, I'd say we most certainly haven't. There are still massive challenges for us. I would say the same is true. I mean, actually, Antonia's figures on exports were massively revealing. We want an export-led economy. We've set ourselves these enormous targets for increasing our exports, but we're actually kind of nowhere near achieving them. So I think we were coming back to those themes not because they're new, but because they are the ones which we recognise we still have to think, very, very hard about resolving in the economy.
Look, I think the point is the themes aren't new. I mean, the themes are the big intractable problems that we've got to solve. But I think we felt that what we were trying to do was to generate some new ideas. And I certainly think in the export space, I mean, well, one thing that we recognised, and we had UKTI colleagues there, was that we haven't been good enough. We haven't adopted really aggressively a sector strategy or a country strategy. So now this will be, I mean, ultimately it'll be for the people whose day jobs this is to take this forward. But it was a kind of challenge, essentially, to those people to say, why haven't we done this? Now we think this is what we should do. I also really believe we have in no way even begun to scratch the surface of what we could do on big data. I mean, big data is the big thing that's going to happen next. And well, it's happening already. And then Britain could position itself to be in a position to take advantage of this. And, how we do that, and actually thinking about how we do unlock data sets and looking at the data that we hold in government and what we could unlock and using that to create markets, to bring buyers and sellers together. I think there's something in there that we're not doing at the moment. So whether the idea is new, I mean, I don't know, but I think that we certainly haven't done it. And now what this conversation represented was a commitment to get better at doing it, which I think we do want to take forward. And there's a team in the Cabinet Office, the Transparency team, headed by Paul Maltby, who was there in our session, who has taken away to try and drive forward more for this, to unlock this data and to work with government to do that.
I would say also what we are hoping to do, quite a lot of specific points and actions came out of the day. Some of them we're hoping to weave into our policy making now. Some of them, in truth, we're probably not going to weave into our policy making now. Charles' brave, and I thought excellent suggestion of a doubling of the science and research budget is one which, we've just had a spending review. That's not going to happen now. But I think what we as civil servants have a responsibility to do is to keep bringing these challenges back to future politicians, future governments, if the evidence tells us that these are the issues we need to be thinking about.
Helen? I was just going to pick up on your point about devolution and decentralising, because you're absolutely right. It has been talked about for a very long time. And I think there's something intrinsically difficult about it, if we're being really honest. I think we do find it quite difficult to let go of things that have been driven from Whitehall. But the world's changing around us. Many civil servants are involved in delivering services right across the country. But those of us in Whitehall, we're getting smaller and smaller. And there's something for us to think through about what does a smaller, more strategic, perhaps, civil service deliver from the centre, and what do we look to others to deliver? So from my department, which I haven't been in very long, but they've been experimenting with things like community budgets, where local authorities can run budgets together and use the money more flexibly to meet their local priorities. And just moving into a new phase with that called public service transformation, which again is helping people, because again local budgets in the public sector are reducing too, but again to use that money across traditional boundaries to meet some of the real goals, growth being one of them, but in the budget the chance to announce money from health going into adult social care to really encourage health and local authorities to work across the boundaries. So I think we've got more examples of those things beginning to start to happen. But I think we need to say, well, what's the big next step we're prepared to take? And I think that's a challenge to us in Whitehall. But people out there are getting increasingly frustrated with us. Now, the Heseltine pot, some of Rachel's skills money went into that. Some of our new homes bonus went into that. So we're beginning to, devolve some money and some responsibilities that haven't been devolved before. But still a long way to go, I agree. Are there any other points? Go on, you want to ask something. I can see it in your face. Do you want to...
Hi, yes, I'm not a civil servant. I was just one of the exhibitors, and I just found, so I don't feel I should ask, but what about, I'm a small business person, and obviously the word is deregulation. I never heard that, so I know it's been around for a long time, but it's one of those things that for small business people particularly is quite important. But thank you for having me as a guest there.
Are there any bits of regulation you would want to point to particularly?
Well, the VAT for small businesses, I think.
Oh, anyone feels they can have a go at VAT? I certainly don't. Yeah, go on, Bernadette.
Well, just to say, and to reassure you, actually that did come up, I know, because some of our visits were to smaller business people in particular. So I mentioned Anya Hindmarsh, and I think she had some quite challenging points to make about regulation. I believe you were there, Rachel, so the horse's mouth, or the nearest we have it to it.
No, and actually I have small businesses as well, and we are planning on publishing a small business strategy in the autumn, and I am hoping that something on deregulation will be a big part of it. And actually, so the visit to Anya Hindmarsh was very timely, because that was pretty much what she talked about. She had a list of pieces of regulation, she basically hated. But also what was interesting for me is it's not actually sometimes even just the regulation, but it's things like guidance. So one of the ones that shocked me was she'd been thinking of taking an apprenticeship, which of course is very dear to my skills heart. And she said, but I looked up, time is money. I looked up at the guidance, 60 pages. No way, I'm reading that. No way, so I'm not doing it. So part also in my kind of, formative thinking about what this strategy will cover will be something about simplification as well as deregulation, and trying to get all the guidance and everything we do down to a page, 2 pages. Can't put it on a page, it doesn't work. Okay, any other questions while I've got the microphone? Yes.
This is a question for you, actually. Basically, targeted skills investments, but for the sectors that have actually done quite well during the recession, and how they're being introduced to the communities where you've got the highest unemployment. So they're the kind of resource which you can train up for these skills.
Yes, that's a very good question too. It kind of comes to matching again. Okay, so the question I think, so let me make sure I've got the question right. So I think the question was where we're putting investment into certain sectors where we know that we have skill shortages, how are we matching that to areas where we have very, very low skills and people needing skilling up? And high unemployment. Yes. Yeah, well, that is you could write a thesis on that question, because it's not just as simple, unfortunately, as just getting people who are unemployed and then kind of matching them. Partly it's because some of the people who are in that situation, they actually need their aspirations raising. A lot of them want to work locally, which is not necessarily the same as where the jobs in other more successful sectors are based. Part of it will be to do with actually their schooling. There is a fairly terrible map which is being compiled by the Royal Institute for Engineers, where they have kind of red bits of the country where they're kind of their English and maths, they haven't even attained GCSE level at English and maths. And the scary thing is they're dotted around, but there's a lot in the manufacturing bases as well. A lot of this is also to do, once you've raised aspiration, it's also to do with information and getting the right information into people in terms of what courses they can do. And this kind of feeds into the simplification of the qualifications, because if they've got 12,000 courses, the chances are they're not actually going to pick whichever qualification they need. Lead you into careers advice. The Department for Education is now devolving that to schools. Some schools take it really seriously, some don't. Some have lots of businesses going in to raise aspiration, some don't. So somehow we have to kind of try and match the devolution to schools with actually making sure that these children have enough. And then also in a lot of the local areas, what Manchester, for example, is doing, it is doing exactly what Helen was talking about, where it is trying to use some of its skills budget and its adult care budget to actually fix the family before they can fix the unemployed young person, because they say to get them permanently into employment rather than bouncing about, you need to change all the things that are in their atmosphere and their family ambience in order to change it. So it's a brilliant question, but it's also a huge challenge because it is so multifaceted. I can hardly hear you, so can you come?
Like the Bill Strickland model for, it's in Pittsburgh in the US when the steel industry went down. You had high unemployment, high crime, but then they focused on very key skills that were just needed. They're so specific. They, within a year they can train them up. But it's very specific, and these act as social regenerative things as well. So you can have these broad strategies for skills investments, but I mean these things, when you have these simple models, I think that's an example where you can draw direct investment and see a positive outcome straight away, as opposed to like umbrellaing the whole thing.
Well, it's a very interesting but what we hear from the very successful sectors are actually what they need is they need greater levels of English, they need greater levels of maths, and they need people at that very high end of technology. So I've talked to numerous sectors round about the country, and I haven't yet come to a place where you can have fairly low-level, low-skilled in GCSE maths and English who can go into very specific skills that are needed in something like the steel industry. But it's a lovely idea if it would work. Anything else?
Are there any final questions anyone would like to ask before we finish? One thing I'd be interested to know and get feedback on, actually, is what visibility. This is a question. Because I asked the question at the beginning, who's heard of the top 200? And I would say only a couple of people put their hands up. Now that begs an interesting question in my mind about the visibility of the work that we do as a collective leadership in the civil service, and whether maybe there is more we can do actually to make sure that we are both talking about the right things, i.e. the things which you and colleagues around the country think we should be talking about, but also that we are sort of engaging people more, as I hope we've begun to do today, in some of the conclusions we draw and how we take those forward. So, I don't know whether, I presume there are ways you can feed back into this event online, etc. afterwards, but it does, I think there's a genuinely interesting question there, and I think I and all my colleagues in the top 200 would be keen to ensure that we are sort of catching your attention and making sure that the conversations and the things we decide are ones which are really of use, of interest, and are helping you in your jobs. With that, Antonia, no, you looked as if you were going to say something. That's fine. In which case, with that, thank you very much. We'll be around for 10 minutes or so. If any of you want to come and speak to us directly, we're very happy to do that. Thank you.